Fallout 4 on PlayStation is just broken. It's not a little unstable, and it's not just buggy in a typical Bethesda jank way. You bought Fallout 4 DLC, and now it just doesn't work. You don't have access to a product you paid for. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. I don't want to talk about checklists of fixes you've already tried. This video is a deep dive into how it's possible that Bethesda screwed up so bad, and not for the first time either, but also how it's possible that nothing is being done to correct this, either by Bethesda themselves, or by PlayStation, or anyone else really. Over the last weeks, I've spent hours digging into this issue, not just reading one Reddit thread or skimming comments, but going through hundreds of reports across my own videos, other YouTube channels, long Reddit discussions, and direct player feedback. PS4, PS5, disc owners, digital owners, Game of the Year editions, Season Pass buyers, Creation Club users, people with mods, people who never touched mods at all. And after all that, one thing is very clear. This isn't a random bug. This isn't user error. And this isn't something PlayStation players can realistically fix on their own. What's happening right now is the result of how modern console games are licensed, updated, and controlled. And Fallout 4 just happens to be the perfect storm. Before we talk about why fixes are failing, we need to talk about something most people, myself included, never think about until it breaks. And that is ownership. You don't actually own DLC the way you think you do. When most people say, "I bought this DLC," what they mean is simple. They paid money. They downloaded content. They expect it to work. And that used to be enough. It probably should be enough. But modern console games don't treat DLC as something you permanently install and keep forever. They treat it as licensed access that is constantly being checked, validated, and revalidated. In Fallout 4's case on PlayStation, your DLC access depends on several systems all agreeing at the same time that you're entitled to that content. At a minimum, that includes your PlayStation account license, PlayStation's entitlement database, the Fallout 4 game build you're running, Bethesda's internal content flags, and the update layer connecting everything. If even one of those breaks, the game can decide your DLC isn't there, even though you paid for it years ago. And this is the key point that a lot of people miss. Your DLC usually isn't deleted per se. The license still exists. PlayStation still shows it as owned. The problem is that Fallout 4 refuses to acknowledge it. That distinction matters because it explains why so many common fixes don't work. Okay, let me go over why this all started after the anniversary. The timing here is not a coincidence. The vast majority of reports about missing DLC, broken saves, and untriggered content began after Bethesda rolled out the anniversary update. That update did a few critical things at once. It changed how Fallout 4 handles paid content. It added Creation Club entitlements directly into the game flow. It altered how DLC is validated on launch. It introduced new build versions across PS4 and PS5. Any one of those can cause issues. All of them together create a fragile system where older purchases can suddenly stop registering. And once that happens on PlayStation, players run into a hard wall. Because unlike PC players, PlayStation players cannot roll back updates. If the update breaks something, you are locked into that version until Bethesda pushes a fix. That's just a fact. That's a hard platform rule. Okay, next I want to go over why the restore licenses fix helps some players, but it fails for the majority. If you've been following this issue at all, you've seen the same advice repeated everywhere. Restore licenses. And to be clear, that advice is not wrong. Restoring licenses forces PlayStation to recheck what your account owns. It can fix simple mismatches. It can resolve cases where your console just hasn't synced properly. For some players, it works instantly, but for most, it does absolutely nothing. Here's why. Restoring licenses only fixes PlayStation's side of the equation. It does not force Fallout 4 to re-accept those licenses internally. That's why so many people report this exact scenario. PlayStation says the DLC is installed. The store says it's owned. But Fallout 4 still says it's missing. At that point, you're no longer dealing with a console issue. You're dealing with a game-level entitlement failure. And that's not something users can override. The illusion of installed but not active. One of the most frustrating things players report is seeing DLC marked as installed, yet completely unusable. Saves refuse to load, fast travel points disappear. DLC quests never trigger. Workshop items vanish. From the player's perspective, it feels like the game is lying. In reality, the files may actually be on your console. But Fallout 4 doesn't just check for files. It checks whether those files are authorized for your account under the current game version. If that authorization fails, the content may as well not exist. This is why clean reinstalls often fail. You can delete everything, reinstall everything, and still end up in the same broken state because the issue isn't missing data. It's a broken entitlement handshake. Okay, but what about if you own a disc? Disc owners are reporting some of the worst cases. Physical copies of Fallout 4 often rely on a combination of a disc license, a digital DLC license, and a specific region match. If any of those don't align perfectly, DLC validation can fail. For example, a disc from one region with DLC from another. A PS4 disc upgraded to PS5 with mismatched entitlements. Before the update, these edge cases often worked anyway. After the update, they don't. And once a region mismatch exists, no amount of reinstalling will fix it. That's permanent. A lot of players have gone nuclear. They deleted the game, deleted all DLC, deleted saves, reinstalled everything from scratch. Some even tried multiple copies, digital, physical, Game of the Year discs. And for many of them, nothing changed. That's because reinstalling does not reset entitlements. It does not rewrite how Fallout 4 interprets your licenses. It only replaces files. If the entitlement logic itself is broken, reinstalling is like repainting a house with a cracked foundation. At this point, it should be obvious why so many comments say the same thing. I tried everything. They're not exaggerating. Once you hit a state where Fallout 4 no longer recognizes your DLC, there is no player-side fix that reliably works. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because the reality is, the problem is not in players' control, it's in Bethesda's. And Bethesda hasn't been very competent lately. So if the problem isn't missing files, and it isn't something players can fix on their end, the obvious question becomes, why hasn't this been fixed already? And while Bethesda's incompetence is of course to blame, that alone still doesn't explain why it seems worse on PlayStation than anywhere else. Let's talk about why PC players aren't stuck the same way. Okay, one thing that keeps coming up in the comments is this idea that everyone is affected equally. That's not actually true. PC players are absolutely dealing with broken content, crashes, and Creation Club issues. Xbox players are reporting problems too. This isn't a PlayStation-only mess, but PlayStation players are stuck in a unique way. On PC, players can roll back the game to an older version, disable updates, patch entitlement issues manually, use community fixes, bypass broken checks entirely. On Xbox, the situation isn't perfect, but there's a major structural difference. Microsoft owns Bethesda. They also own Xbox, Windows, and the licensing ecosystem connecting them. That matters. Now, I want to transparently say that I haven't yet done extensive research into what the Fallout situation is like on Xbox, so I can't speak as to what's actually happening under the hood with Xbox. But here's what makes sense to me, and take it with a grain of salt. Xbox, along with PC, exist inside a single corporate ecosystem where entitlement chains are unified. When something breaks, it's still all happening under one roof. But PlayStation is not part of that ecosystem. Fallout 4 on PlayStation sits at the intersection of two completely separate licensing systems that do not fully trust or understand each other, and that's where things start to fall apart. When Fallout 4 launches on PlayStation, it has to verify multiple things in real time. First, it needs to verify that PlayStation believes you own the DLC. Then, it needs to verify that the game build expects that DLC. Next, it needs to verify that Bethesda's internal flags align with your purchases. And finally, it must verify that Creation Club content doesn't conflict. If everything lines up, the game loads normally. If it doesn't and any one of those verifications fails, Fallout 4 doesn't ask questions, it just disables the content. And here's the critical limitation. Sony cannot override Bethesda's entitlement logic. Bethesda cannot directly rewrite Sony's licensing system. So when something breaks at the intersection between the two, neither side can just flip a switch and fix it. That's why support tickets bounce players back and forth. Bethesda says it's a platform issue. Sony says it's a game issue. And the player is left in the middle with broken content. Okay, why can't PlayStation just roll it back? One of the most common comments I see is, why don't they just roll back the update? On PC, that's trivial. On console, it's not allowed. Sony does not permit individual titles to maintain multiple live versions that players can freely select. Once an update is pushed and required, that's the version everyone gets. That means no legacy Fallout 4 build, no pre-anniversary option, and no offline rollback once the update installs. So even if Bethesda wanted to temporarily revert the update on PlayStation, it's not as simple as pushing a button. They would need to submit a new patch, get it certified, and redeploy it. And certification takes time. That's why nothing happens quickly. Now, here's why the Creation Club made everything worse. Creation Club content is not treated like traditional DLC. It's licensed differently. It's validated differently. It's loaded dynamically. And Fallout 4's anniversary update didn't just add Creation Club content on top of what was already existing, it wove it into the core entitlement logic. That's a dangerous move on a game this old. Because now if Creation Club entitlements fail to sync correctly, they can interfere with how the game validates other paid content. That's why some players report bizarre situations like one creation working, others missing, or DLC technically installed but not triggering, or saves breaking even without mods. The game is checking too many things at once, and if one check fails, everything downstream breaks. And now, let's talk about something that's probably on all our minds. Why this keeps happening with Bethesda games, and why Bethesda keeps screwing up. At this point, we need to address the elephant in the room. This is not an isolated Fallout 4 incident. Bethesda has a long history of shipping updates that break existing systems, relying on post-launch fixes and underestimating legacy content complexity. They treat live games like ongoing experiments. And that approach made more sense when games were simpler. It does not work well when games are 10 years old, when content is layered on top of content, when ownership is license-based instead of physical, and when platforms are locked down. Fallout 4 was never designed to be continuously restructured a decade later. The anniversary update forced modern monetization systems into an old framework, and the cracks are now impossible to ignore. Why lawsuits keep coming up, and why they probably won't work. A huge portion of the comments mention lawsuits, class actions, or breach of contract. I absolutely understand the anger and frustration. It makes absolute sense. Players should be angry. But realistically, being painfully objective, lawsuits are unlikely to succeed here. Why? Because the content technically still exists. Some players are unaffected. Companies reserve the right to update software. And perhaps most importantly, digital purchases are licensed, not owned. That doesn't mean the situation is acceptable. It just means the legal system isn't built to protect players in cases like this. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Okay, so let me go over what players can do and what they can't. Right now, there are only 3 realistic paths forward for affected PlayStation players. Number 1, wait for a Bethesda side fix. This is the only solution that would help everyone if it were to happen. Number 2, escalate through support channels. Some players have had entitlements manually corrected, but this is slow and inconsistent at best, and in many cases, it simply doesn't help at all. Number 3, walk away. Many players already have. This is truly sad, but I feel this is the option most players are gravitating towards, and it makes absolute sense. What players cannot do is fix this themselves. No amount of reinstalling, license restoring, cache clearing, or hoping will solve a broken entitlement chain. And that's not your fault. And by the way, this whole situation matters for more than just Fallout 4. This situation is bigger than one game. It's a preview of what happens when digital ownership replaces physical ownership. updates are mandatory, rollbacks are forbidden, and when content is fragmented across systems. Fallout 4 just happens to be the example that exposed it, mostly due to Bethesda's greed and incompetence. And that's why so many comments sound less like bug reports and more like disillusionment. People aren't just mad that Fallout 4 is broken. To be clear, Fallout 4 is broken, and Bethesda royally screwed up again, and people are getting fed up with it. But it's more than that. It's the whole principle of the thing. It's how the whole system is set up to work. Players are mad because something they paid for years ago can be silently taken away by an update they didn't ask for, and there is nothing they can do about it. Here's the bottom line. Fallout 4 doesn't work properly for a large number of players. Technically, Bethesda didn't delete your DLC, but they changed the rules that allow the game to recognize it. And in a way, that's worse, because it's a legal argument they can use, if it ever were to come to it. Once that recognition breaks on PlayStation and it can no longer recognize the DLC, players have no tools to fix it themselves, until Bethesda pushes a real entitlement level fix. This problem will continue. That's not pessimism. That's simply how the system works. If and when a real fix arrives, I'll cover it immediately. But until then, the most important thing players can have is clarity, not false hope. Because clarity never changes. I have a few ideas on what to talk about next, and I'll leave a pinned comment with different ideas, and you can vote on what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and Happy New Year!